Good afternoon, everyone, both here in real life and virtually. I'm Simon Tay, the chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. I'm really happy to welcome all of you, both virtually, but even more so here in person in Singapore. For the audience in Singapore, I should just say that our current rules are so long as you're 1 meter apart, if you want, you can take off your mask. So it's not illegal to do so. You don't have to. If you prefer to be a bit more cautious or you have some other concern, then please go on. But obviously, if you're drinking water or the glass of wine, you have to take your mask off. Otherwise, you're going to make a very silly mistake. We didn't make a mistake, though, on getting our guest speakers and the topic. I was telling Bert Hoffman and Pang Gang, who's here virtually, that when I asked them both and was delighted to have them accept an invitation, I knew that this issue would be there. But literally, I think, was it today or yesterday, it's on the front page of the Financial Times, which you've been watching the Financial Times. Is, I think, one of the few days that Ukraine is pushed off the front page and something else is substantive is there. This issue is a perennial, and we really, China's economic growth has been a big issue for a long time, in positive ways, as its rapid growth really pull forward not just the Chinese people by the millions and millions, but the whole region, as the region really closely interconnected with China as kind of a center of gravity and a lot of supply chains. China's slowing growth has also been a concern domestically, but for the same reason, question marks about how it will be across the region. And over the last few years, the pandemic texture on top of that, it's been even more important and more complex. If you remember, in the early stage, when the rest of the world was still faltering, back in the Trump days, it was many people were saying that it's China's economic growth that's going to be the sort of the world engine, even more so. And here we are at a kind of different inflection point. X months after Trump has, at the moment at least, vacated office, we see a different Western optimism opening. I was just in Europe, and I felt at some point I was in a different universe of reckless, maskless behavior. And then, of course, in a way, those of us who've enjoyed visiting China, trying to understand the very huge, complex country, have been a bit sad and a bit disappointed that we can't go in, and understandably for their reasons, but trying to figure out when that will end and what impacts it might be. And then, of course, in the most recent phase of this period, zero COVID policy, the Omicron variant, which has swept across our entire region, has now started to become visible in China. So I think that's roughly, to me, where I thought our two experts really come in, and we're delighted to have them. I really believe that the perspective from within China is so important and still does not get heard enough. So I'm delighted to have Professor Pang Gang, the Executive Director of the National Economic Research Institute in China, via Zoom. He's in Beijing. He just mentioned that he's been to Shenzhen, so he's been a bit around his country. And he, both in terms of his situational, physically there, but more than that, his astute reading of the country has been somebody I've always turned to try to understand that huge behemoth called China. Next to me in real life is Bert Hoffman, who was with the World Bank looking at China for many years, and now is director of the East Asia Institute, which is part of the National University of Singapore. The East Asia Institute perhaps isn't as well known as it should be. It's been around for many years. It was the brainchild of our former Deputy Prime Minister, Goh Keng Swee, and has really done stellar work in forming Singapore's elite thinking, government thinking about what's happening in China. And of course, there have been decades of engagement, which the EI has really helped with. We're delighted to have Bert here in person, but virtually, as well as the virtual audience. I think that's enough from me in terms of introducing our two distinguished speakers and giving my own humble thoughts on this issue. I think we should start with the session. And after my very bad example of speaking too long, I'm told to keep our speakers to about 10, 12 minutes each, and then hopefully to have more of a sort of discussion between them and the audience too. So if I may, I will go to the virtual world first and ask Fang Gang to speak for us from China. Fang Gang, will you speak to us?
Okay, thank you very much, Simon, for having me. I think we still, without knowing when we will have a in-person meeting again, it still seems so uncertain. Anyway, I think I don't need to speak about the details of the situation now. I believe you all know from the FP, from all the information. I believe among the audience, there are some people have the business with China, particularly with the company in Shanghai. So I believe you all know what the situation. It's a really very uncertain and a very difficult situation, I would say. Well, if we stand in the shoes of the policymakers, it's really a very difficult decision to make anyway. People talking about the, Omicron is different. Well, it's different, but still, you are facing facing some kind of the death rate, right? The zero tolerance policy in past 2 years basically means zero deaths from the COVID. So that has been the situation since the Wuhan lockdown. After Wuhan lockdown, basically China have no deaths. But now, if you open up, if you change this policy with the 1.4 billion population, your death rate could be still very low, lower than before. But death toll could be, unimaginable, with this 1.4 billion population. So that's why I think the policymakers are very cautious. I believe they are thinking, because now you may see from the Chinese media and the Chinese website, the social media, a lot of the comments, a lot of the suggestions. People are of course still cooperative, but it now shows differences, from the time of Wuhan lockdown. During that, people understand, this is a serious illness. So people are very cautious. But now when people, know that the Omicron have a very light syndrome without a high death rate, and the people start to think differently, So, but anyway, I think this is I'm not in a position to comment on the issue of scientific issue, the medical issue. But we can see the government is definitely thinking about the change. They are speeding up the vaccination. They speed up the rural area vaccination. They speed up the elderliness, the vaccination for the elderly. I think that's one of the preparation. And another thing is they start to build up more module hospital. Yesterday, I was told that even Lhasa, the Tibet have 0 cases now, but Tibet now is a plan to have some kind of module hospital, prepare for the worst cases if it break out, and the people will not crash the current the medical facilities. But also you need to have a psychological preparation for any change. So that's very uncertain, But anyway, given the pandemic, I think the impact on the economy is very, very serious. Yesterday, we got the data, the statistics for the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter basically the 2 months was still okay. But the March has it already shows the differences. So the March, the consumption is actually minus growth. And then if the second quarter, status could be very, very, could be very low, I would say. Now we still have 4.8%. The April could be very low, and the second quarter could be something like a 2% or something. Interruptions, not only for the consumption, the service sector, now all the production, the transportation, all the transactions, export. The Shanghai port is heavily, lagged behind. So it's really have the very negative impact on the on the export. So that means the negative impact on the global supply chain. So that's really the situation. That is actually the largest factor which have determine how the macroeconomic performance of this year. Of course, government are taking some actions. Yesterday, State Council hold a meeting with all the departments and try to enforce the circulation, transportation, the logistics, and the productions, try to recover the economic activities. More policies are coming, and I think the situation can be improved in next few days even. Government now mobilized to try to improve the situation. I believe there are more policy actions will take place. And also government will also take a more radical macro stimulus to support the economic growth. The fiscal policy already have quite a stimulus. I think they will take more action. They recently have some stimulus policy on the monetary side. But personally, I don't believe the monetary policy could be very effective, because nobody really have a good project, to like to borrow. So basically, now rely on the fiscal policies. So basically, that's what I can offer. It's still uncertain. So, and I believe you all understand this kind of uncertainty. Yeah.
Thank you, Fan Gang. I think we all do understand. And, when I talk about it, I would like to say that Singapore too has gone through many phases of this. I don't think anyone has been really, really immune to this problem and figure out how the policies. And I think I take encouragement that government policymakers are very aware of this sharp disruptions, and over the next days, perhaps we'll try to figure out how they can respond to it. Later on, perhaps I will try and draw you out on some of the longer term events, some of the dual circulation and other underlying thinking in China too, which is sort of playing into this present crisis. But right now, I'd like to pass it on to Bert Hoffman, if I may, who does watch China very closely, but particularly I think sitting in Singapore is able to also share with us some of that question about the ripple effects and other things. So Bert, if I can hand over the time to you.
All right, good. I will actually go a little bit into that longer term. Fan Gang has covered the short term quite well. And I agree with everything that he said. I would probably be a bit sharper on the zero COVID policy, where a lot of time has been wasted and the vaccination rates are way too low, and now they are stuck with that policy. That switch will happen, but it will take at least a couple of months to catch up on the vaccination rate. and in between, the policies are pushed to the extreme because they come from the top and everybody wants to show that they follow the zero COVID policy. And therefore, there is a lockdown that is a double lockdown. And it can be much more relaxed with almost the same results. I know Van Gang can't say this, but it does mean that there is policy space even in the zero COVID. On the first quarter data, I fully agree with Van Gang. Look, the first 2 months were okay. A lot of that actually came from spillovers from last year. Last year wasn't great, in part because the fiscal engine started to work very late. And therefore, you see a very positive outcome on infrastructure investment in the first quarter. Manufacturing investment was really very good in the first 2 months. It's now starting to taper off. Why was it very good? Because exports were driving growth last year, and there's still lots of manufacturing exports to be done, and manufacturers trying to invest. So there is a positive side to the story, and that's really on the supply side. On the demand side, it's far less solid. And Van Gang mentioned the retail sales in March are now in negative territory. It's been a while since that happened. The consumption overall has not been very good, in part because the employment situation is not very good, because due to the lockdowns, a lot of the services are still closed down. Nobody goes to restaurants, even if they're actually not locked down. You don't go to a restaurant because you might be caught. Because if there's one case in that restaurant that is found, you will be locked up in the zero COVID policy. So there's a lot of hesitancy. Van Gang just said that he had traveled to Shenzhen. It will take him 2 weeks in Beijing in his own lockdown before he can go walk around again. So people don't like to travel, even if they're allowed to. People don't like to go out. So, and then who really gets hit are the workers in the service sector. A lot of them are migrants. They're insufficiently covered by the social safety nets in China. The urban social safety nets are good and they're solid. The rural and the migrant social safety nets are not. And so that's what you see back in the consumption numbers. It's pretty hard to change that in the short term. So you do come back to public investment as being an engine of growth. I think there's lots of good projects out there. I'm a bit more optimistic than Van Gang. In the energy transition that China has started to embark upon, there's massive amounts of investments to be done. There's estimates of something like 100% of GDP by 2060, so between now and 2060. So that would be 2.5%, 3% of GDP every year in renewable energies and transmission and all that other stuff. If you front load that, there's a lot of flexibility there. When do you do that? So that's actually the new engine. It's no longer the roads and the bridges and the railways. No, it's this new energy that could be the big engine of infrastructure investment. And that would make sense. I mean, building 6-lane highways right next to 6-lane highways doesn't make sense anymore. The World Bank, where I used to work, they did finance high-speed rail, but we stopped it because it economically didn't make sense anymore. So what is now done in high-speed rail are white elephants. They don't make economic sense. But there's lots of other investments still to be done. It's essential that that switch is being made, that there's more sensible investment being made, that there is probably less investment being made. I mean, frankly, Lo Jiwei, the former finance minister, always said, look, I have this problem. There's 45% of GDP in savings. Where am I going to put it? And if I put it abroad, everybody around the world cries out, because that would mean huge current account surpluses. That's simply the flip side of very large capital exports. So that was the case in the 2000s. Up to 8% of GDP in current account surpluses is unimaginable in a current atmosphere. So China will have to build on the consumption side. There's lots of opportunities there. And once they do, I actually see a relatively benign growth outlook. Because yes, you will invest a bit less, but it's very hard. You still will be something like 40%, and then maybe 10 years from now to 35 and 30%. If you make that investment, and even if you waste some of that, you still end up with a high growth rate. If you look at the education numbers now in China, everybody says, and Scott Rozelle, the famous academic, made hay from a point that he said, look, the education level overall in China's working population is still very low, and that's true. But the inflow is very, very different. So on average, actually, the latest census says about 15% as tertiary education. The inflow of the new entrants into the labor market is more than 50. So the composition of the labor force is changing really quite rapidly. That actually contributes to growth as well. Yes, we have a declining labor force, but there is another Germany into the early retirement. So if the retirement age were to be pushed up to a sensible number, 65, say, you would find a labor force, an additional labor force of about 40, 45 million people. And that's actually, it's a bit more than Germany. So there's lots of sources of growth on the supply side that would make me conclude that there is a lot of potential growth out there. In an optimistic scenario with lots of productivity increase, sort of China on the higher end of productivity increase for high income countries, because China is about to become a high income country, it would add up to something like 5.1, 5.2% growth in potential growth until 2035. So Xi Jinping would be happy with that because he wants 4.75% growth that would double the GDP number of 2020 by 2035. It's not a given. GFP, despite Soros saying it does not fall from heaven, it's not manna from heaven, you need to work for it. And you need to do all kinds of reforms to make an economy more efficient. Is the appetite there for those reforms in China? Frankly, I think that there is more reforms ongoing than a lot of people think and believe and say. It's been not all the things that liberal market economists would like, but I actually believe that there's quite a bit of reform dynamics in China that in the end will deliver on that productivity increase that China is looking for. But if it doesn't happen, if there is a clampdown, if it is a much more statist approach, if reforms sort of stop, if the state enterprises will dominate far more than in the past, well, then we're looking at a far lower productivity growth. Far lower productivity growth also means that it becomes less profitable to invest, and it becomes less profitable to invest in human capital. So all of the factors that could be positive for growth, they will start turning neutral or negative. And then you would end up with something like 3 to 3.5% growth, but not negative growth. The reason is that you still have a very big chunk of investment that will continue to drive growth. It will be far less efficient growth, but it would still be growth. So I find it very hard to see a scenario, and even with a debt crisis, even if you throw in a debt crisis that a lot of people are fearful of, that will cost you 1 or 2 years of growth, but it won't make your growth disappear. It won't make your potential growth path very different. You may lose level, but then you continue to grow again. That's the experience of other countries. I'm sure China can manage that. So they might lose a year or two of growth in a debt problem, but they won't lose growth momentum. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Bert. I think that was a very sound reading. Maybe I go back to Fang Gang in case, Fang Gang, maybe my opening remarks threw you off, so you were very here and now, and maybe that's the mood in China. But I would love to draw you out on the broader issues, the longer term issues that Bert talked about before I turn to you.
Yeah. Well, actually, I agree with the Bert on the long-term issues. Actually, I think you are a little bit more optimistic than me for many issues. But I would like to add two things. To add your optimistic for two things. One is that I agree with you that the traditional infrastructure is not mean too much sense, for the economic calculation. But one thing I would like to say is still makes sense. That is urbanization. China's urbanization still very low. It's the latest statistics is something like 64%. It's lower than most of developing countries. So the urban facilities, including the urban public service sectors, still need a lot of investment. The China's hospital is very crowded everywhere, particularly good hospitals, and education, as you mentioned, and all the the transportation, group of cities, the metropolitan group of cities, how they connected the large city, the small city, the medium-sized city, and the city and the rural areas. That kind of development integration will also offer the opportunities for investment as well, including the new energy, the green development. All those things are for the cities, for the urbanization, they still offer the potentials for the growth. And the second thing that I like to add is that you mentioned the reforms. China, a lot of China's reform actually come from the opening up. In past few years, since the Donald Trump's trade war, China have opened quite a lot. Now the FDI investment have no restrictions on the ownership ratio. Simon, we discussed this RCEP new framework, and China now have the RCEP, and China now have actually the free trade agreement with Japan under the RCEP the framework. So that never happened. So from that point of view, I would say China really in this new global situation, China is really interested in this multilateralism, and China is really want to open to all the countries, maybe the more to other countries. ASEAN this year, last year, ASEAN is not China's largest trade partner, but it's really the front runner. Anyway, China is, I believe, interested in further opening. That will give them more the potential for the growth. Also, we'll have good feedback into the domestic reforms. That also good for the further growth. So that's what I want to agree with the Bird the predictions.
Thank you, Fang Gang. I would like to open this to discussion to the people here in the room first. And we've got a very simple system where there's a microphone right here. It's sensitive enough to pick up your voice if you project a bit as if talking to me. So we could do that. As to encourage you, I want to put two more broad questions on the table, which we can answer it all together. And this is perhaps the other thing in the headlines. Fang Gang mentioned the Sino-American tensions. But if I could put on that the complexion of the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the sanctions that America put in place against Russia and complications that might mean for the already fraught trade and technology ties with China. So that's my sort of big other elephant in the room. And I'm happy to first ask any other questions or points you want to raise. Please go ahead. Can you hear him, Fang Gang?
Has the report or the crackdown on the tech sector, is that just a blip in the growth, or is this something that has longer term ramifications? Because obviously the tech sector used to be one of the dynamic sectors. And in my pension fund, it has done very well until recently.
And more broadly, of course, while we talk about the new infrastructure, we didn't mention tech in particular, and that might be something.
Would be my question.
Thank you very much. Yes. So there are two other big issues: Ukraine-Russian thing, and then of course the tech sector. Anybody else with one more question or comment? Anybody? Please. Yeah.
Thank you, François from the France.
Can you hear him, Fang Gang?
Yeah, but not very clear.
Louder, perhaps.
Thank you. I have, if I may, have two questions related, I guess. One is about inflation. we see that there are a lot of bottlenecks coming back to the forefront. What does the situation in China imply for global inflation? Should it last longer? The second one is, I was wondering whether there was a sort of inconsistency between promoting FTAs, RCs, etc., and at the same time putting the emphasis on development of domestic consumption in the context of this dual circulation system.
Okay, so we've got three really large questions.
No, Simon, you may need to repeat the last two questions.
The first issue I raised was, any knock-on effects on China's economy from the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the sanctions that America has put on the table. The second was about the tech sector and the controls that have been put in place. And more generally speaking, is that sector got a lot more energy to drive things. For example, China has put its hand up to join the digital economy agreements. The third questions were about the impacts from China's bottlenecks in inflation, whether it can have a knock-on effect globally. And the fourth is about the dual circulation proponents versus this opening, which Fang Gang and others have emphasized. I think that covers about it. Can I do the four before we get to you? Otherwise, I have to repeat everything again. Okay, let me do that, and then
Bert, go first.
you don't have to pick all four. I want to make it clear that you don't have to pick all
Well,
four.
I'd love to go a bit more into the geopolitics, but maybe we should put that a little bit at the end. Okay,
Sure.
so let's stick to the economics and then ease into the geopolitics, which is I don't know anything about, so I can talk about it freely. That's the.
Okay, tell me what you know first.
So first on the tech crackdown, frankly, I think there is some justification for some of the actions that we have seen. But I think overall, the way it is done and some of the sectors that have been addressed has been a policy mistake. And I think the State Council Financial Sector Development and Stability Committee, led by Liu He, that came out a couple of weeks back, they basically told the regulators, wrap up your crackdown. And because it is a clear risk for China, on the one hand, there is SMEs struggling to get any credit. On the other hand, they have the fantastic machines of Ant Finance and others to actually deliver the credit that state banks never did, and I'm not sure whether they're actually going to do it. So I think there has been, yes, there were issues of monopolistic behavior. There were issues of excessive use of algorithms, many things that were not right. But the way it was cracked down, and I think in part that was in reaction to, if you want, a relative, by the big tech sectors that felt that the regulators were no longer relevant. But by now, some sectors have been destroyed. On the education side, one can talk about the tutoring, but of course, for rural education, which is a far lower quality than urban education, online education would have been a solution. Nobody wants to touch it now. Online healthcare would have been a great solution. Nobody wants to touch it now. It may come from the state, but IT solutions from the state have not really worked well in China, nor in many other countries around the world. So I think there's been a real loss, not the whole baby, but a large part of the baby has been thrown out with the bathwater. And I think that is a loss for China. On inflation, frankly, inflation it doesn't come from China; it comes to China. CPI inflation in China is 1.5% now over the past quarter, year on year. So it is very low compared to anywhere else in the world. The PPI is higher; it's around 8%. But it's still low compared to some of the numbers that you see in Europe, some of the numbers that you see in the United States. So because China manufactures 27% of the world, they actually, and they're relatively isolated from some of the spikes in commodity prices, in part because of the long-term contracts, in part because they get a discount on Russian oil now, just like the Indians do. And so I don't see too much inflationary pressure coming from China. In the long run, there is inflationary pressure coming from China simply because China's cost structure is changing quite rapidly. As China grows richer, some of the big labor-intensive stuff, well, it's moving out of China, but also you see cost increases, higher environmental standards, etc. So that is really is going to continue. Finally, on the exports and dual circulation. So look, I think there's a tension. Let me just say it. This is a closed door meeting, right? Or is it going to be on a website somewhere?
It won't be on a website, but right now you are being broadcast to some people.
No, that's all. That's all right.
Okay.
I mean, some people. So I once said, look, dual circulation is a great strategy for Cold War, but actually, in closer reading, is what China says. Look, we don't want to be dependent on the international circulation for critical supply chains. And frankly, everybody in the world is talking like that now, and especially in Europe, where some of these critical supply chains include energy, and it's clear that you don't want to be dependent on Russia. So I think that is the attitude. There's nothing wrong with trade, there's nothing wrong with openness, but on critical supplies, China doesn't want to be dependent, and they are perfectly happy that others are dependent on China. So that's, I think, the correct interpretation of the dual circulation. So you can have an increase in exports even though you follow a dual circulation path. Final word on that. Over time, China's share of exports in GDP will decline. The reason for that is that as China gets richer, domestic prices will go up, services will become more important, and therefore the tradable goods sector will take a lower and lower share. In the United States, it's 11% exports. In China, it's still 18%, but it will go, for continental-sized economies such as China, it will go down further. So actually 18, it peaked again in 2020 and over 20, but it will come down.
Thank you. Hang Kang, would you like to take on any of the 4 points or?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to talk about the politics of the Ukraine war, but a little bit on the economy issue. I think China is worried about this U.S. So-called long arm jurisdiction. You know, we have the lesson from Huawei, we lesson from other cases. This is all about this long arm jurisdiction. How U.S. play that and how China to avoid that will be the issue, for the next stage. For the tech sector, I agree with what Bert said. I'm not going to make a further comment. Only call your notice that recently, not only that meeting, Liu He organized, but before that, State Council actually called those tycoons, those tech people together to study how to have a development. People are rethinking of those policies, which are actually very contractive and very, not really positive for the development of the so-called digital economy, which government really promote, And so I'm not going to talk about that. Inflation, I would rather to call your attention to the current interruptions of the supply chain. So if the delay of the delivery of Chinese manufacturing goods and transportation, all the logistic problems that may cause some kind of interruption of supply chain, that may have some impact. Just like last year, the U.S. port have been congested. And then the transportation, the fees are increased, and then that contributed to some kind of the inflation. So that's a short-term effect of this COVID policies. That could, in the long run, I don't think China have faced this high inflation or exporting inflation issue. Probably in the long run, the food issue could be could be a factor, which also have the impact on the China's CPI, because that's a key component of the China CPI for the food. For the dual circulation, I agree with Bird. That's basically is for the domestic production of a domestic effort to break down the so-called bottleneck created by the decoupling from the U.S. and other countries. More independence of more development of scientific research and the innovation, but that could be a problem in the long run. In the long run, if China can do everything, if China create all the technology to break down all the bottleneck, what kind of trade we can do? What do we buy from others? So that's a problem. The globalization is supposed not the case that everybody do their own import substitution. But if we can do all this import substitution, how we can do the trade. So in the long run, that could be the problem as well. But at the moment, definitely China is facing this so-called decoupling effort. So that's what the government try to turn the more attention to this bottlenecks and to be more independent.
Thank you, Fan Gang. Let's go for another round of questions and comments. I postponed the lady over here. So let's start with her. And then if there's anybody else, Steve,
There's two on
the friends. Yeah, please go ahead.
I do actually have a very generic question.
I'm not sure if Fan Gang can hear you with the mask on.
So I do have a very generic question for Fan Gang, and the question is, what does it take for the government to reduce the sensitivity of the zero COVID policy?
Okay, that's the big elephant about the COVID and whether zero COVID can change. Early on, of course, Bert already suggested that even if you keep the top thing, there could be fine-tuning within that. For example, Fan Gang told me that after going to Shenzhen, he has to spend 2 weeks at home, even if he passed all his ART and other tests, which strike me as being something that could be fine-tuned. Is there another question or comment? Steve? Steve Cochran from Moody's, please.
Thanks, Steve Cochran, Moody's Analytics. I just wonder if you could address a little bit the property debt crisis situation. You mentioned that China could survive a year or two of a debt crisis. But I just wonder, how you think this might play out, either one of you, how long it might take to resolve it. It seems like any policies related to the debt crisis now don't seem to be having much effect in terms of stimulating demand or stimulating supply. It's kind of status quo still. So anything more that you could add on that? It's kind of a near-term question.
Thanks, Steve. Online, as Bert said, there are two questions, the first is more a comment about Chinese population aging, which I think already in a way, was it Bert who discussed that, or was it Fan Gang who said, by just altering the retirement age, that could be a very significant driver of change. I think the second point the same person made was an interesting one about the dual circulation and then setting standards, for example, in the telecommunication communication space, the different standards that can be set and lowering of IP costs. That's a question from online. One more question, anyone in the room? If not, we'll go ahead with that. Annie, would you like something? No? Shall we invert the order and let Fan Gang go? Which order did we do last time? Okay. Fan Gang, would you like to go first?
Could you repeat the three questions now we have?
The first question is back to the elephant in the room. Could zero COVID start to change or morph, and what are the conditions for that? The second was about the property debt crisis, which is really struck the headlines a few months ago, and then it's a little bit more quieter now, and whether that could really be resolved in a way, or is Bert right in assessing that it's a 1 or 2 year problem? If I understood you right, Bert. And can be.
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. Let's clarify that then. Okay, let's clarify that.
Okay.
The last part is simply this question of whether the dual circulation also is a way of setting different standards, which could change some of the costs of compared to foreign standards in the Chinese market. Yeah. That's right.
Okay, the first one, I think I already mentioned that I really don't know when and how the policy will change. That's really the political decision. Now that we can guess. But I believe people are thinking about this.
Yes.
And as I said, they are doing several things to prepare. Good things for change or not change. You need to do that anyway. Vaccination, increasing the coverage of the vaccination, and also prepare some facilities, medical facilities like a module hospital for next stage of anything. So that will, that kind of the preparation may contribute to the decision making of change policy. But really, this is a very uncertain. I really don't know. It's a very difficult, I repeat again, very difficult decision to make for any politicians now. This is about the death, this is about 1.4 billion population and how the, not the death rate, but not death toll issue. And about that, I'm not too worried about it. There's a case like Everbrand, something like that, and the local government have the debt issue as well. But I'm not going to details for that. But I just mentioned, first of all, the government still have capacities to deal with that. China government debt over GDP ratio only something like a 46% officially. You can say there are some hidden local debt, but it's just around that level. Compared to Japan, it's 265. US now is 130. European country mostly over 100. So the government still have the room, to issue more debt and to clean up something. And the banking sector, the financial sector, I think that banking still enjoy the very high profit. And they have quite a lot of reserve money. Government reserve ratio still something like 6%, 7%. And they have extra reserves. So I believe that if they combine all those resources, they can solve some problem, So prevent the worst thing, prevent the financial crisis to happen. So it is an issue, both for the local government and some company issue have some kind of company special problem. Some companies are overstretched using the leverage to expand to the different territory, different sector. That's kind of the crazy behavior. It's already happened, in different sectors. But I would say, generally speaking, it's a manageable. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but it's a manageable.
Company level problem, maybe a sectoral level problem, but there's enough firepower, enough reserves.
That's right.
Chinese government, so that it doesn't become a systemic problem. I think that's why I heard you say.
Yeah.
Now, I have been told that I misunderstood Bert Hoffman's point on this one, maybe because of Steve's way he put it. But you want to clarify, please? I'm so sorry if I got you wrong.
No, so I mean, I didn't say it was going to be solved in 1 or 2 years.
Oh.
Frankly, I don't have enough expertise.
Okay.
But let me add a few. I said China can withstand a debt crisis and still grow at very reasonable rates in the medium term.
Okay.
And the international evidence by Reinhardt and Rogoff shows that the average debt crisis cost about basically 10 percentage points in growth. So and it takes for 2 years to get there. So you miss out on 10 percentage point growth, you level, and then you grow again.
So without being perfect, It's got a lot of room, headroom
Yes,
to
I mean, you
still.
don't want it.
Yeah.
Let's say that that is a recommendation,
Mm.
but it's not the end of the world. A lot of people talk about, oh, China's debt is so high and it's 280% of GDP, and yes, but all of that is domestic debt.
Yes.
And yes, there's still issues with that. The biggest issue is the efficiency of the
System.
spending
Yeah.
that has been done with the debt.
Mm.
Apartments is not the best way of going about at this point. Infrastructure is not the best way of going about. So there is
Efficient, yes.
debt being created that is not for the most efficient uses. Okay, and that is a financial sector issue.
Mm.
It's a systemic governance issue in China. Has it gone worse? I don't think so. But one of the key solutions to this is to provide better investment options for ordinary citizens who save 30 percentage point of their household income, and they have nowhere to go except for deposits, a wildly gyrating stock market,
Yeah.
or apartments.
Yeah.
And they choose apartments.
So someone's going to create better products which make more sense to the overall
A
economy.
pension product,
Yeah.
a pension product for Chinese citizens, solid pension product, private, I think, because the public pension products tend to be non-solid over time.
Mm.
They're not Singapore. It's different there in China.
Mm.
The fully funded pension that were set up in the 90s, de facto are not fully funded, especially not in the very aged provinces. So have the third pillar of the China's pension system, which is a privately supplied pension saving scheme. And if you want a 401k type of product, that'd be fantastic. And then there is less need to, people don't want to buy as many apartments. The empty apartments, well, where will they go? I think Fang Gang actually is right. There's still lots of people that want to move to urban areas. If
Yes.
you let them. If you let
Yes.
them. So hukou reforms is absolutely key. Will this be at the price that people currently think that they're going to get for their apartment? I don't think so. So I think prices will have to correct. And that is too bad for those people that hold an apartment, but it's not worse than holding Alibaba. Right? So in other words, the assets pricing will fall to some extent. But it's not just 64% urbanization. It's really 46% urbanization, because 18 percentage point are people that live in urban areas but do not have hukou. So in other words, they don't get a mortgage. They have a very hard time buying an apartment. And so there is actually latent demand out there that can overnight increase the demand for apartments in a major way. Government chooses not to go there for many reasons, and some of them I understand, others I don't. But it would be a major reform. And then if you want divert away from this investing in apartments for investment purposes. Xi Jinping wants us to move away from investing in apartments for speculative reasons. So they want people to live in that, and think he's right.
Yeah, good. We're almost out of time. Perhaps one last question, and then I'll allow the two speakers to cover any point that I have somehow missed.
Hi, Simon. Because we both don't cover the Ukraine issue.
No,
You're
okay.
a diplomat, you're ambassador. So I would like to listen to your comments on Ukraine issue.
I'm here to draw the strands together, and I think that in a way we have answered it. First, one of the things you're saying is that China is very. I'm here about these long arm laws, as we all are. I still remember when Singapore banks got hit because of Iran, and there was a scandal in Singapore where one of our big companies got fined in America because they have a branch office in America, not because they were doing anything in America. So I would say that a lot of us are a bit nervous as well. If China was somehow pulled into by those long arm laws, it would have, Russia being sanctioned, I think we can tolerate it. There are some dislocations here in Asia.
1.7%.
Yeah. But China sanctioned, we really don't want to go there. So I myself was in Europe and asked this question whether China would do that because of this friendship without limits. And I said, I hope they don't, and I don't think they will. It's a question of whether America is looking for a fight, and I really hope they aren't, because it really would bring the whole global economy down. So I think and so from the one point you made, Fang Gang, I was listening and I extrapolated my other points. I don't know, I'm not saying this is your view, but that's roughly what I was thinking. But you want to jump in?
I'd like to add to
Please.
this, because I mean, this is the crucial question.
Yes.
And I think China is not quite reading the room well, and especially not
Yes,
with regard to Europe.
yes.
Because, I mean, at least the domestic press keeps on saying, oh, it's all done by America, and it's America that instigated NATO, and they encroached upon Russia. So it's America, the evil empire.
Mhm.
And Europe, they really should have a neutral stance, and they're innocent bystander. Well, actually, that's not reading the room right. The Europeans are driving this,
Yes.
and the Europeans are livid with what Russia has done. The Europeans don't understand China's position, who has always put sovereignty on the highest pedestal possible, and suddenly that doesn't seem to be that important if it's the Ukraine. So it's very hard for Europeans and for Americans to understand the Chinese position. Indeed, they're ready to pounce, which is not right. But I'm really quite nervous that something happens, and then suddenly we slide into Cold War II because of the actions that can be inadvertently taken in and literally in the next couple of months. So I sleep less well than I used to,
Yes.
because I
Yes.
think that would be foolish. I think it would be a huge loss. It would be inappropriate. But once you're in that corner, it's very hard to move back. And I do appreciate. I thought the video conference between Biden, the second one between Biden and Xi, was very interesting, where Xi actually said, look, your people have not really translated positive feeling between the leaders into more concrete action. So China feels left out as well. And I can understand that as well. They haven't gained anything. There was Biden that is just, it's Trump with better table manners. So
Yeah.
that doesn't help either in creating this global atmosphere that would get the world back to growth. So I hope there will be lots of wisdom on both sides of this.
That's a
Yes.
very interesting statement, and I think the optimistic one. I do think he's got a point. Bert Hoffman's got a very good point about the European view of China, because you mustn't forget, it wasn't like long ago Europeans were trying to sign a comprehensive investment agreement, and suddenly this plus things before this have really changed European minds about China. I hope China is very much aware of this, rather than seeing Europeans simply as a refraction of the American view. The American view, I'm afraid, I partly disagree, but I'm going to America soon. I expect to be told endlessly that Xi Jinping and China have got malevolent plans for all of us. So that part has not gone over here. We're at the end of the time, though, of course, with a topic like China and two really distinguished, insightful experts, we could go on forever. But I do think we have to end at some point, and I do want to thank both of them. If I could add one more point, I think Fang Gang is sitting in China, and I would never encourage anyone there to question a major policy like COVID, zero COVID. But if I again listen to some of the things he said, these are my words. I'm not trying to put words in Fang Gang's mouth. But he was saying, if they are seriously looking at the policy, looking at the cost it's playing both on human lives as well as on economic lives, economic livelihoods, they are looking at how to build capacity, rolling out vaccinations as quickly as they can among the elderly, among the rural, putting these module hospitals, because while China's gone very far, once you leave Beijing and Shanghai, the hospital quality, Singapore is tiny. It's not 1.4 billion people, what Fang Gang said. So, but in a sense, I think, without again putting words in Fang Gang's mouth, I think he gave me some room for optimism that basically is not a dead issue, it's not forever, and that when able, they will. And I've combined that with what Bert Hoffman said, that even within the broad umbrella of COVID zero, there can be fine tuning. So it's not simply an on-off switch of massive lockdowns and they will find some way forward in a very practical, if I could say, pragmatic China way.
And
doing
still
this.
call it zero COVID.
And yes, exactly. Give the leaders the title they want, but find a way to make the cat do what the cat does. So thank you both very much, Fang Gang, virtually. I hope to see you before too long in real life when that
Yeah.
policy changes and allows
Yeah.
us. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for doing this.
Good to see
And
you,
thank
Fang
Thank
Gang.
you.
in
Thank
real
you.
life. Thank you all for joining us.
Nice to join you. Okay, good. Thank you.
you.